Anne-Marie Green is in her home studio in Philadelphia. And of course, I'm reporting from what we've started to call the CBS News Upper West Side Bureau, which is my apartment. All right, so some important political news not related to COVID-19. Recently declassified footnotes from a government report first obtained by CBS News shows that the FBI relied on the controversial Steele dossier to secure surveillance warrants for a Trump campaign aide before and after the 2016 election. Senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge broke the story, and she joins us now. So, Catherine, bring us up to speed on the backstory and why this reporting is so significant.
Well, Vlad, the key idea to remember here is that the FBI standard for evidence to secure a surveillance warrant is scrupulously accurate. And the Inspector General, the internal watchdog for the Justice Department, Michael E. Horowitz, found last December that there were 17 inaccuracies and omissions in the 4 surveillance warrant applications for a Trump campaign aide, Carter Page. And after that, there was a different review that found that 2 of those warrants were legally defective. They lacked probable cause, and 2 others are under review. And against that backdrop, 2 Republican senators, Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson, asked that the footnotes in the Horowitz report be declassified. They were able to look behind the curtain, look at the classified information, and they said, wait a minute, we want the public to look at this information so that they can see what kind of evidence and what kind of warnings were available to the FBI when they made the decision to surveil someone on a political campaign.
So there was an Inspector General's report looking into the surveillance of the Trump campaign. This additional information now, does that have an impact or affect the outcome of that IG report?
Well, Anne-Marie, the key thing to remember here is that the 4 surveillance warrants that were put to the National Security Court by the FBI relied on a key piece of evidence that's known as the Steele dossier. Just to refresh people's memories at home, this was the opposition research that was put together by a former British spy, Christopher Steele. It was commissioned by a company called Fusion GPS and funded by Democrats. And what the new footnotes that are declassified show is that there were multiple warnings to the FBI, both before and after the 2016 that information in the dossier was tainted with Russian disinformation. And significantly, the warnings to the FBI became more precise and more specific over time. At one point, there was a U.S. intelligence community report that said specifically that they had high confidence, so certainty, if you will, that there was evidence in the dossier that was the product of Russian disinformation. But despite these warnings, kind of like the system blinking red, the FBI Russia probe continued to rely on this evidence to secure the surveillance warrants for that Trump campaign aide.
So, Catherine, does the new information change the findings of the IG's report into surveillance of the Trump campaign?
Well, I don't think it changes the findings, but I think it raises sort of a bigger question about the role of Russia's interference in the 2016 election. Remember, Special Counsel Robert Mueller said that there were multiple and systematic efforts by the Russians to interfere in our elections. It was not just Democratic emails, but what we now from the footnotes, there was an effort by the Russians to sort of force disinformation into the public discourse through this dossier. It was not only likely, but there was evidence that some of that information came from Russian intelligence. And that's important because I've worked in this national security space for 2 decades, and my contacts always emphasized to me that the goal of the Russians with a disinformation campaign is to undermine confidence in U.S. government institutions. So the democratic process, the electoral process, the office of the presidency. It's not so much about one candidate or one party over another. It's about damaging and tainting Americans' views about whether the democratic process really works. So raising questions, undermining confidence. And I think that's one of the most important elements that's brought to the fore with the declassification of these footnotes.
Yeah, the whole point of the Mueller investigation was to look into that, to look into Russian interference in the election. And I suppose the declassification of these footnotes sort of reveals, or would I presume is added evidence that they were certainly doing that, but also reveals just how deep those tentacles were able to go. I mean, straight to the FBI.
Well, Amory, that's an excellent point. It shows you that the Russians, and intelligence officials have always said that one of their sort of strongest cards to play is their ability to engage with these disinformation operations. And so the declassified footnotes in the Inspector General's report show that it was going on at another level, and that in 2016 and especially in 2017, the system was basically flashing red about this Steele dossier. And I think that raises really important questions about a time frame in 2017, May and June. You remember that May is when FBI Director James Comey was fired and Special Counsel Robert Mueller was appointed. And it's also at that time that there were very specific warnings about the dossier likely being tainted by a Russian disinformation campaign, yet it was still used to secure another surveillance warrant for this Trump campaign aide that was signed off on by the Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. And it really sort of put wind in the sails still of the Mueller probe, which continued really for the better part of 18 months or 2 years.
Speaking of the Department of Justice, Catherine, as you know, it's been some time since the Attorney General, William Barr, released the redacted version of the Mueller report. So I wonder what these revelations mean for the report's conclusion into Russian interference in the 2016 election. As you point out, it's something that we've also heard in speaking to individuals like Michael Morrell, the former deputy director of the CIA, to other national security individuals who tell us it's not about red or blue, Democrat or Republican, one candidate or another, President Trump or Hillary Clinton. It's about diminishing our beliefs and our ideals in our American institutions. So I wonder what this means for the Mueller report.
I think for the Mueller report, and this is just my own view, I just really want to come back to this idea that it reinforces the idea that the Russians were interfering in the 2016 election. And it wasn't just, as you mentioned, Vlad, rightly, one candidate or one party. It was a broad disinformation campaign that was designed to denigrate our system and to undermine voter confidence in democracy and the electoral process. I think the issue that's really important going forward is that the declassification of these footnotes, in many ways, based on my reporting here at CBS News, will facilitate the investigation by the U.S. Attorney John Durham in Connecticut, who was looking at the origins of the FBI Russia probe in 2016. And it may in some ways accelerate that investigation because the information is now out in the public domain. And I just want to emphasize also that the Attorney General in recent days has said publicly that Durham is not doing a report, he's doing a criminal investigation at this point. And if there is evidence of criminal wrongdoing, the Attorney General has vowed to prosecute these individuals. And it's beyond politics here. It's about really reestablishing confidence in this super secret national security court that gives the FBI the power to gather intelligence on Americans inside the United States. I mean, just think about that. There really is no higher legal bar for the Bureau or for the Justice Department to cross, and to the public to have confidence that when they do this, the evidence really merits that kind of intrusion.
Yeah, you know, I think that people need to know how rare it is for us to get the opportunity, like you described it as looking behind the curtain, you know, just to reinforce, this is the FISA Court. It's a very secret court. We as the public never really find out what evidence they're looking at or the thought process into making that final decision. And now we're getting a tiny little window. And you're right, it's a little disturbing.
Well, the FISA Court is a super secret national security court, and I'm going to sort of put on my legal hat for just a second. It's called ex parte, which means it's only a single party is represented. So there's a special responsibility on the government to represent information and evidence that is helpful, that supports their application to gather intelligence on an American citizen, but also to present evidence that undercuts their rationale for spying on an American inside the United States. So the judges in the court can weigh all of the evidence in front of them and say, yes, we think this warrants this extraordinary intrusion into someone's private life. And what the FBI, I say that sort of loosely, the FBI team, Crossfire Hurricane, this is a small group of people. This is not about the entire Bureau. It's a small group of people. They were faulted by the Inspector General last December for 17 errors and omissions. And what we now know from the declassified footnotes is that the system was really blinking red about this Steele dossier, that it may be tainted with Russian disinformation. The warnings got more specific over time, yet the FBI Crossfire Hurricane team continued to rely on it and did not share with the court that there were all of these warnings that it may be problematic.
Fascinating. And of course now, Catherine, all eyes on federal prosecutor John Durham, eagerly anticipating his investigation and the results of that investigation. Catherine Herridge, breaking news for us here at CBS News. Catherine, thank you as always. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.